Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jenny. And thank you to all of you that are joining today and taking time out of your day. For those that don't know me, my name is Olivia Seet, and I'm a partner at Major Lindsey Africa. This year marks my 17-year anniversary with the company. And I can tell you over the years, many people have asked me about, advancing their career. We all know that it's the hard skills that get you hired, but it's the soft skills that get you promoted. And in an increasingly globalized world, working effectively with our colleagues and our clients is crucial, especially as the world gets smaller and smaller. So while many people kind of learn these learn these skills while they're on the job, they have varying levels of success. So today we are going to explore how we can actually use data to enhance our understanding and teaching of these soft skills. So as Jenny said, we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to interject, drop the questions on into the Q&A or the chat function. As she mentioned, the Q&A section is anonymous if you prefer to be anonymous. Otherwise, if you're open for everyone to looking at the question, please feel free to put it in the chat function. We're also going to have about 15 minutes at the end, 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how the webinar goes for any further questions. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Carl Hegarty to you today. He is a global business growth specialist and is renowned for helping organizations expand globally. Carl has worked with hundreds of companies, including those like Salesforce, Oracle, and Microsoft. And what he does is helps them to enhance their sales, leadership, and cross-cultural communication. Carl played a key role in growing the TSL marketing company, a company in the US, when there were just 5 people that were there. He helped to grow it globally and came out to Singapore 18 years ago to establish their APAC operations. He's also a LinkedIn learning instructor and has a course on international business foundations, which is taken by thousands of people worldwide. He has received the Global Business Insight Award for Best Expert in Executive Coaching and Consulting in Singapore for 2020 and in 2021. Additionally, he is an accredited coach with the International Coaching Federation. So not only that, he is also an author. So his first book, which you can see up here on the screen, The Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet, won the 2021 Axiom Business Award. I have read it and it's definitely worth the read as it has some really interesting stories and I think all of you will be able to relate to it. Definitely one to put on the summer reading list if you're still putting that together. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Carl Hegarty. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Olivia, so much for the intro. Thank you, Jenny. Welcome everybody who is listening in today. And yes, I was actually just thinking about the book as well, because there's an audio book which seems to be very popular these days. And the good news is it's not narrated by me. It's narrated by a professional who also does the Jack Reacher books. For anybody who likes action books, they somehow chose the Jack Reacher guy to do this book. And as you can hear from my American accent, yes, you get to spend the next 40 minutes or so listening to an American tell you about cross-cultural awareness. And the irony does not escape me, but we can have a little bit of fun with this today as we talk about this fascinating topic. As Olivia had said, I've been in Southeast Asia for 18 plus years and working across Europe and the US and Asia for more than that. The big idea and lesson that I've learned is that organizations have gone global, but people haven't. And what I want to look at today is let's talk about some of those misunderstandings that can happen when people very quickly have to find that they're working with different people from different parts of the world, different languages, different cultures. We can look at the misunderstandings that happen. And really the good news is that we are not the first ones going through this. This has been going on for centuries, if not millennia, cross-cultural misunderstandings. There's great research and there's great data that has been conducted, especially over the last 30, 40 years, that actually start looking and breaking down at where those misunderstandings originate. And if we can understand that data, it can help us bridge those gaps. So that's what I want to do today. Now, before I get into the content, maybe Jenny, you can help out with this first survey. I want to just get a sense of people who are joining here today. And let's see, maybe if we could bring that first question up. This is all anonymous questions here. Here's the two quick questions for you. First one, on average, I work with people from multiple countries on a daily or weekly basis. Feel free to answer that one. Typically, for those of us here in Singapore, that's all the time, but depends on where people are dialing in. Second question, my organization handles cross-cultural situations poorly. We lose money on this often. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about cross-cultural communication affecting our international business. We're okay. We could be better. We try to adapt cross cultures, but we've made costly mistakes in the past. Or, hey, we're great. We got this figured out. We're a globally minded organization that knows how to work effectively across cultures and regions. Give you a moment to answer those two questions. Again, this is anonymous. If you have filled this out while we're waiting, on the left-hand side is a QR code. It just connects you to me on LinkedIn. It's pretty much the only social media I use. So feel free to connect that way. You can see I post a lot of content around this topic. All right, Jenny, how are we doing? Okay, so question one, let's see here. We are most strong majority all the time or frequently we're working across cultures. No surprises there. And hey, nobody does this poorly. Nobody's bleeding money, but some people, small amount, aren't sure. We're okay. That's the majority answers here. We're okay. We could be better. 40% says you are great. We are a globally minded organization. Well, congratulations. So that gives us a little bit of a snapshot in terms of some of the people in this audience. So the first idea that I just want to give to everybody here is this statement. Your intentions don't matter. It's how you're perceived. And I do a lot of work with services organizations where oftentimes a statement could be made, an instruction could be given. And, let's say I'm a Westerner from the United States. The way I give an instruction to me could be completely normal. But to somebody else could be coming across as demanding, pushy, rude, insensitive. That's not my intention, but that's how it can come across. And so this is one of the big ideas as a starting point to think about. Your intentions don't matter. It's how you are perceived. And I thought I'd kick off with a real case study here as a starting point today. And Olivia, you can take a look at the chats in case anybody wants to answer the question that I'm about to pose here. But very quick scenario is this is again true story. This was a Western Australian construction company, and they won a contract to build bridges and roads across Western Samoa. So they shipped a bunch of Australian project managers over to manage the thing. They hired a bunch of local construction workers. A lot of issues happened. There were a lot of injuries, a lot of misunderstandings happened. And here's one. One of the Australian project managers gave the following instruction. He said, I won't do it in an accent. He said, I want you to put all of the rubbish in that truck over there, take it to the dump, and burn everything. You got that? So my question is, what do you think happened in that scenario? Anybody writes in? Olivia, you're up. I can't see the chat at the moment. Or Olivia, you can guess.
All right. Somebody has said that they guess that they burned the truck as well.
They burned the truck as well. Well, that somebody is correct. That's exactly what happened. Put the rubbish in the truck, take it to the dump and burn everything. And that's exactly what happened. I know that sounds insane, but misunderstandings like this happen all the time. And what I want you all to think about is, have you ever had that truck on fire moment where you have asked for something or you have gone through a meeting and the outcome is completely different than what you had expected. And you're kind of pulling your hair out going, I have no idea how something like this could have happened. Most people working in international settings do have their own version of a truck on fire story. By the end of today, I just want to show you how we can start using some of this cross-cultural data to be able to understand what happened in the scenario. And I'm going to give you a couple of specific tools to help you minimize or avoid getting trapped in these situations in the future. So that's where I'm going for today. I've said it, we've all said it before, but I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. So if there are comments, questions along the way, just don't hesitate. My working style on this one is to be informal and just have some fun with this topic. All right, so let's get into some of the data as we get there. For some of you, you may have heard of the golden rule, which is treat people the way you want to be treated. That's how I was raised to a degree. When I moved over to Southeast Asia 18 years ago, I wish somebody had taken me aside and kind of shaken me by the shoulders and just said, you got to throw that away. That's not going to help you. You need to treat people the way they want to be treated. It's a one-word difference, and it sounds very common sense, but the devil's in the detail. How do we do that? How do we treat people the way they want to be treated? In the cross-cultural world, it's known as the platinum rule. But if there was one thing that I wish I could tell myself in the past, it would be this one: to treat people the way they want to be treated. I've talked about, we've alluded to this concept of culture and working styles throughout. Let's put a little bit more definition, because working styles are really, it's kind of like an invisible concept in many ways. Working styles are how we communicate, how teams get led, how a project can get led, how we incentivize individuals, how we incentivize groups. Working styles could also include relationship building. I come from a sales background. We're not really allowed to say sales in the legal world. Lawyers don't consider themselves salespeople. Sorry to tell you, you are. It's required. We have to be selling, or at least persuading, and we have to be building our book of business. So there's a lot of those skills that are necessary in this space. But guess what? Those skills actually vary depending on which part of the world you're working in. Working styles can also include how we manage people below, but also how do we manage up? How do we manage our manager? How do we report back to other parts of the world if our headquarters is somewhere else? Now, because we saw the survey report earlier, we've got a lot of people who say, hey, we're a pretty globally minded organization already. What I'm going to walk you through you may have seen some of this in the past. You may be familiar with some of this. For those of you who are in that spot, that's okay too. I think you can still get some value from this call, because you can use this data to help teach others. Because there's a lot of people who continually will come into our day-to-day work environment, and they really don't have that cultural awareness. So sometimes what I find is that the data can be really helpful. If you can measure the data, if you can measure this stuff, you can begin to manage it. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive then into the data that I'm referring to. And what I'll do is start with communication, which was that top one that we've listed. I'm sure most of you on this call, from this region, are familiar with this concept. There are parts of the world that are much more direct in terms of generally how they communicate. It's referred to as low context in the cross-culture behavioral psychology world. They like to put more complex terminology wherever they can. So you get direct communicators. So that would be people or cultures that say exactly what they mean. You don't have to read between the lines. There's not much nuance to it. And the studies have shown that countries like the United States, Australia, Germany, Netherlands, it's not listed there, but Netherlands is high up there as well. Denmark, these are all very direct communicating cultures. Now, if you're not coming from one of those parts of the world, treat people the way they want to be treated. So the idea here is to start thinking about ways that, okay, how do I communicate in a way that's more impactful and effective for people who come from different communication styles, right? We'll talk about that in more detail. As we move down towards indirect communication, sometimes called high context, that's where you're looking at more nuance, you're looking at more tone. Body language can sometimes be more important here. The United Kingdom is still considered a direct communicating culture. Brazil is close to there as well. And I like to have a little bit of a laugh with the UK, our friends from the UK. I follow this Twitter group called Very British Problems. And here's a list of things that mean no if you are in the UK. And it's just a bunch of phrases that are more wishy-washy. Why? Because it might be perceived to be rude to say no. And so what we find is that even the words like yes and no are sometimes the most complicated words in the English language across the world. What's interesting about the UK is that you could ask somebody, oh, can this get done? And they go, well, we could do, we'll see how this goes. It's a very wishy-washy answer. But the United Kingdom, compared to most of the planet, are direct communicators. That response I just gave, or that example, is direct compared to a majority of the planet, because as we start heading down this spectrum towards more indirect communication, you start getting Mexico, France, Singapore is there, Saudi, the big guys, India, China, all the way down to Indonesia. Japan is far and away, well, not far and away, but they are the most, statistically speaking, the most indirect communicating culture on the planet. If anybody's calling from Japan or speaks Japanese, there's a phrase that essentially means or translates as listening to the wind. And the meaning there is that you have to listen to what's not being said if you want to take away the point of what's being communicated. It is it's the extreme of indirect communication. Thailand also scores incredibly high on that spectrum as well. So again, I think you've probably seen something like this, but what I want to go to now is show you a larger data set. And what this comes from is a professor from INSEAD. Her name's Erin Meyer. She wrote a book called Culture Map, which basically goes into a lot more detail of what I'm about to show you here. What she's done is she's taken research from other cross-cultural studies, and she's broken them apart in ways that I think are pretty interesting and helpful. On the top line here, you see there's our direct communicating, right? Communication could be direct or indirect. You can also look at how people give feedback. Negative feedback is the way she says it. Is it direct or is it indirect? And what I like here is that she's broken apart that bigger communication idea, because what she noticed was that this can vary. So me from the United States, I could be a very direct communicator, but when I give feedback, I might actually have a different style. And that could be totally normal in the United States, but that can cause confusion in other parts of the world. And we'll give some examples there. Going down, you look at leading, which means like how are the teams structured? How is that power dynamic? Is it egalitarian where everybody has a say? Is there more of an informality to it? Are we on first name basis? Is the boss's door always open? Is there even a boss? Versus the opposite, which is more of a hierarchy where there's much more of a rigid understanding of that order in terms of decision making, which actually gets to the next one, which is how are decisions made as well. She's found that there's some variation there. So we'll see shortly how some of the countries stack up to this. I'm giving you a lot of information here. So typically this comes from a longer workshop that I do with groups to be able to help them personally understand where they come from, as well as their teams or their clients. So you're getting the super fast version of this. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming with all of these different phrases here, but we'll keep going. The next one down is trusting. This is a big one to me. Task-based. So how do we build relationships? Are we task-based, or are we more relationship-based? Task-based cultures and people, I'll give an extreme. They would kind of go, look, I don't necessarily even need to like this person. If they have the talent that I need, we will work together just fine. I don't need to meet this person 20 times. I will do a deal with them over the phone. We don't need to go have dinner. We don't need to go get drunk before we do this. Let's just get it done. That's a task focused cultural style. The opposite side is no, 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 no. We need to get to know each other first. I need to know who I'm working with. I need to be able to build trust in this way. We need to go have lunch a lot. We need to talk about family backgrounds. This can be expressed in a number of different ways. But as you could probably tell from these two extremes, those are very different approaches to how to build a relationship. To me, I spend a lot of time on this, thinking about it personally, but also working with individuals as to how can they adapt their style to be able to build relationships quickly in different parts of the world so that they can get stuff done, right? And we'll give some more examples of that as we talk on here. Another big one, how do we disagree? Some cultures are confrontational. They like to actually fight it out or verbally fight it out. And it's assumed that you've already separated the problem from the person. In other parts of the world, that's totally foreign. They would much rather avoid direct confrontation. They would not speak up in a group setting to be able to push back or to express a disagreement. That's going to be solved in a back channel approach. This has caused, I've been involved in discussions and case studies where tens of millions of dollars have been lost from a single conversation of misunderstanding based on confrontation. And then the final one would be scheduling. Are we linear time or flex time? I always like flex time. I think that's a polite way of saying that time is just viewed as more of a liberal type of approach. We start when we start. There's no need to be super time sensitive about this. The other side is, I've done a lot of work in Switzerland, and I've saw people show up to a meeting on time and they apologized for showing up on time. So that would be a good extreme on one side. So these are a bunch of different working styles. As I said, if you can measure it, you can begin to manage it. Now, I'm going to show you, actually, let me just show you right now. Here's Singapore, Malaysia, if this popped up the right way. Singapore in yellow, Malaysia in red. You can see we're kind of heading or leaning on the right-hand side of all of these measurements. And for anybody from either of these countries, it's a great conversation starter. Do you agree? Do you disagree? You can put some more countries in the region here. So here's our friends from China. Belgium, for some reason, popped up on this one. I have access to about 82, 84 countries. So what's really fun is to be able to actually build custom data maps. Actually, before I start talking about this, let's see my brethren. Oh, that's what everyone was waiting for. The United States. Look at us, zigging and zagging. I have a talk that I give to people from the US chambers, and the title is Why Americans Are So Confusing. And some Americans don't think that's funny. I think it's kind of amusing. But basically the summary of why Americans can be so confusing can be shown from this top. Let me see if my little pointer works here. Laser pointer. This here. We're so proud that we're direct communicators, very low context direct communicators. But look at what we do when we start giving feedback. Here, let's put up the UK. There's the UK. Look at us. We become British again when we give feedback. All of a sudden, when an American, again, and I'm speaking generalities, so I should probably put a disclaimer here, which we can talk about. But oftentimes, Americans will be direct until we're giving negative feedback, and then we do what we call the sandwich. The polite version is the feedback sandwich, where we say something really nice, we give the feedback, and then we say something nice again. We really pad it. And if you're not used to that communication style, I have seen a lot of situations where people don't understand what the feedback is that's being given. I do a lot of work with companies from Germany and France, and they really wrestle with their clients in the United States. They don't understand oftentimes the feedback that's being given to them. Okay, this slide is clearly messy, but you can also see, visually speaking, we've got an east-west divide here. I find this topic fascinating. I like this data set because, visually speaking, this basically maps out, or is one way to try to begin to understand the East-West divide from culture clash. Olivia, was there a question, or did you want to interject? So you pop up.
Yeah, someone had just asked if there was any India data that you had.
There is. Let me show you. I think I've got Japan and India next. Look at that.
Okay,
ask and you shall receive. Great
there
question. Good timing. So yeah, India is kind of buried in there as well. And this is probably a good time to say, what are we at with India? They've got 1.3 billion people that we are trying to put into these tiny little dots on these measurements. So this is where we have to take a step back and go, wait a minute. This is macro data, right? There are literally millions of exceptions to all of this stuff. So we have to be careful with this entire model. I like this model for a couple of reasons. I like it because I think it's like a best first guess to begin understanding some of these different working styles that we might come across. That's the first point. Second reason why I like it is that this is a good way to be able to quickly teach others about some of these styles. And what I find really helpful is I'll work with somebody from Japan. I'll show them this Japan data and go, can you walk me through this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's talk about each. Can you give me an example? And this is a great way, a great safe way to have what could be a challenging conversation, because we're using data to try to better understand where we're coming from. And as I had mentioned, I do these workshops with teams, and we'll build custom data maps based on where everybody's from, or where the clients are coming from. And we use it as a starting point to have what I think are more educated and targeted conversations about these topics. Okay. So anyway, that's my sort of warning that we're in macro data range, and we have to be careful. I'll leave it at that. But look how interesting Japan is, right? Super, as we had mentioned, with the communication styles, super indirect, and strong hierarchy, super strong hierarchy, but then zigging all the way over on that consensus-driven approach. And I find that this has helped me personally getting deals done in Japan, because there's a frustration from people from outside, which is this stuff takes forever to get stuff done over there. Why? Because it seems like we've got to get sign off from the top people, but then everybody's got to be okay with it and kind of be on the same page before they move forward. That can be very frustrating. But what I've found is that once something gets signed off on, they actually move pretty quickly, because everybody in the process already knows what's going on. And you compare that with other parts of the world where there might be somebody who signs off on something and then it gets thrown to another group. They've got no idea what's going on, and we've got to go re-educate people from the get-go. So that it's kind of an interesting way just to revisit how business gets done in different parts of the world. Olivia, you're back. Was there another question?
Yep, sorry, I was just unmuting.
Okay.
So someone had asked, I don't know if it's started now, but maybe they'll have to reach out. Can you compare Belgium and the Netherlands? I was told by a Dutch colleague that Flemish-speaking Belgians and Dutch are culturally very different. which is very interesting if that's the case. What's your experience with that?
So, okay, so right now I don't have, I have Belgium data and I would have Netherlands data. Let's go back to our friends over in Belgium. So actually, yeah, and apologies because I don't have the Dutch data set here on these slides. However, they jump out when you start looking at it because they're highly across the board to the left. Are you still there? Did I lose you? Nope. Sorry, somebody's bothering me. Sorry about that. What I was saying was that the Netherlands scores super far to the left on almost every one of these degrees. I can send people the Netherlands data as well. In fact, interesting from a historical standpoint, there was a question that was asked to me years ago. It was like, what are the two most divergent cultures? And according to these data sets, the answer would be the Netherlands and Indonesia. And they've got a little bit of a history together. Not always a pretty history, and sometimes the data might help to explain some of that. But I thought that was kind of an interesting one. So yeah, so we can pull the Netherlands for that person if they want to see that at some point. Yeah, great. Any other questions on this data set? One thing I would bring up if as we're kind of thinking about this stuff, the confrontation piece is pretty fascinating. I don't have Germany up here, but Germany and France score as super high on the confrontations side of things. Meaning, again, they're very direct in their communication. They are quick to disagree in public. They are quick to do that in a group setting. And that's the norm where they come from. But across Southeast Asia, that really is considered a social faux pas. You wouldn't want to do that, right? That's that perfect example of that first slide that I showed, which is your intentions don't matter, it's how you're perceived. And I've seen a lot of deals, a lot of relationships fall apart because people don't understand these different communication styles, especially when it comes to that confrontation piece. So if I were to think about some of the most important, all of these could be important depending on your situation. I find that this one that I'm highlighting here, the confrontational line, the relationship building line are some of the most important ones, as well as the communication in general. So those are kind of my three big ones that cause the most trouble along the way. Okay, so we're good on time here. Actually, we've got to keep moving. So the other thing that can come up, oh, Olivia's back. By the way, everybody, so Olivia, I believe, from Australia. Australia scores very high as being happy to interrupt. Thank you, Olivia. Go ahead. That's a joke. That's a joke. Did you have a question?
Coming from an American. So we could play this game all day, Kyle.
We could.
So someone had a question about, the research around this. How is the data pulled? Where is this? Where are the stats from?
Yeah, important question, and a somewhat controversial one at times. The data. The most modern studies began in the 1970s. There was a Dutch researcher, and I'm going to butcher his pronunciation because I'm American, Geert Hofstede. He is sort of known as the grandfather of modern cross-cultural research. He started his entire data set looking at individuals who worked in IBM worldwide in the 1970s. Arguably, a lot has changed over the last 40 plus years. That data set has grown substantially, but his findings actually seem to hold true even as they added more research on top of it. So he's one of the core data providers. The other one is a company or a group that's called the Globe Study. And that's this ongoing worldwide project that's doing survey work constantly to different parts of the world, a much larger data set. They're looking at working styles. They define them slightly differently. Of course, they don't play nicely together. But what researchers like Erin Meyer has done is she's tried to patch both of those together. And there's some controversy there because she hasn't always shared exactly how she's done it. So it's not the cleanest of answer, but those are really the two big sources. I suspect with the internet, with big data, with AI, I'm hoping that there's some really big breakthroughs that come from just observational, observing all of this mass data sets that are collected from all of us on a daily basis. So hopefully there will be new studies that further this topic in the coming years. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, what I wanted to also talk about very quickly, there's another researcher called Richard Lewis who does his own research. I think he's still using the core sources that I had mentioned earlier. He looks at one of his things, he looks at negotiating styles in different parts of the world. I'll send a link. We can share a link to this later. Actually, let me see if I can. No, I can't highlight that. I can make sure that we share the link to this. But if you just Google Richard Lewis negotiation styles or Richard Lewis culture, these things pop up very quickly. I don't spend huge amounts of time on this personally, but some people have found it very helpful. Again, it's a helpful starting point to get a conversation going. If I was to take on a client from China, say, or be involved in a extensive negotiation, if I had somebody helping me with a background with Chinese culture, Chinese language, I would actually show them this and let them absorb it and say, walk me through this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your experiences with this? And I've found that when you do this, you get actually really good feedback and much more targeted feedback from people when they're able to use this. Here's India, here's Australia. Yeah, Richard Lewis, he must have studied under Freud because all of his images are kind of interesting. No comment. Okay, let's take a look before we'll see who else do we have here. Singapore looks uncomfortable. Indonesia is another one. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this. We will share all of this, but if you are interested in Richard Lewis's research, just that's the best place to start would be to look him up, and you'll see these images pop up everywhere. I found this helpful sometimes. Sometimes I've found it not that helpful. So I thought it was worthwhile sharing because again, where I find it the most helpful is if I am doing something in Indonesia, this is what I'm showing to my colleagues in Indonesia and asking for their feedback on it. Do they agree? Do they disagree? Can they give examples? What advice would they give based off of this as a starting point? Again, that's it's a much smarter way to gain a deeper understanding of working styles in a particular country than just asking kind of a high level, like, oh, what do I need to know before I start working here, right? This is a much more targeted way to do that. Okay, let's see let me just give one further deep dive example from a conversation standpoint. I mentioned this earlier, the two probably most confusing words in the English language are yes and no. And the problem is that often many of us ask close-ended questions, and a close-ended question is asking for a yes or no answer. But if you look at the communication data that I showed earlier, most of the planet doesn't really do well with yes or no answers. There's reasons for that. And it's, so the first idea here is like, avoid close-ended questions. It's hard to do, especially if you're used to asking close-ended questions. Words that lead to close-ended questions are all of these things. Can this be done? Is that clear? Are there any questions? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? You ask somebody, does that make sense? In most parts of the world, they're going to say yes, because it might be perceived to be rude otherwise. So you got to avoid those words. And the word is soften. I don't like that word, but it's a starting point. And you could change your language by saying something like, look, I wonder if you could walk me through the next steps here. In other words, if I were to say, I've got this paper that needs to be finished by next Friday. Do you have any questions on this? Does that make sense? You got that? Yes or no? No, you're not going to get a real answer there. I've got this paper due. We've got to get this thing done by next Friday. I wonder if you could walk me through the steps that you're going to take to make sure that this happens. Can you, right? And let them walk you through it. And so the idea here is literally to change some of the language to be able to try and catch some of these things that can fall through. I'm not going to get into the details of this one. Storytelling is another great way to soften. So give an example, try to provide additional context. So the reason I'm asking is that we had a project that was due a couple of months ago. We thought it was going to come in on time, but then we found out that the research team they had a couple of areas that they were confused on. It caused multi-week delay, and we just don't want that to happen again. So it's a nice way to kind of soften the situation. Then there's this idea called ultimate active listening, and I'll leave, this will be kind of the last idea of the session here, which is play back everything that you've just heard, or get the other person to play back. And this is really important on any type of conference call or meeting, especially if there might be a cultural misunderstanding going on. What you want to do is you want to almost play back. We kind of think about it like play back the movie. Before we wrap up, I think it would help if you could just walk me through your next steps, or walk me through what you just heard. And if we were to go back to our burning car scenario at the beginning, if I applied this new formula, and that Australian project manager says, he gives the instruction, because basically what happened was he ended with a close-ended question, right? Put it in the truck, take it to the dump, burn everything. You got that? And there's probably some hierarchy going on. There's probably some language issues. There's probably some feedback issues. So you go, well, there's probably some confrontation challenges there. So I wonder if you could walk me through your next steps here. The reason I say that is because we've had a couple of accidents here, and we just want to make sure everything is crystal clear. Can you just walk me through your next steps? And this is common sense, but we don't do it all the time. So I highly recommend to try to turn that into just a routine on these calls, which is have somebody play back what they've heard, what the next step is. It might add 30 seconds a minute to a call, but man, it can save millions of dollars along the way. All right, so that's a super quick example of that, and I'm just mindful of time here. 7 behaviors to improve cross-cultural relationships. That ultimate active listening is really powerful. I highly recommend just playing around with that, and just trying to change your behavior so that it's being used consistently. Play back the movie before you wrap up a conversation. That will massively reduce uncertainty. Create specific culture maps based on your audience. As I'd mentioned, I think we've got 80 plus 85 countries, so you can use that as a great starting point. And I've already given you some examples of how you could do that. Take time to learn about each other's countries, working styles, ask great questions. I have a document that I'm happy to share with people. I would just ask that you email me. I'll put my email address up shortly. But it's basically just kickoff questions to start building stronger relationships with counterparts in different parts of the world. Typically, we get on calls, we do that soft talk, we talk about the weather, we talk about traffic or whatever. There are smarter ways to do this, especially when you're working globally, to be able to get better insight into different working styles. So I'll share that document, or you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to share that document with you. If you are managing a team or building a global team, you want to be able to refocus on team values. The values can vary, or they can be expressed in different parts of the world. These are some questions. I won't dwell on this right now, but again, if you're looking at team building across different regions, this can be important. increase the amount of global team programs, interactions. Again, very specific, but if there are ways to be able to combine different regions for projects, that's a great internal way to try to mix and match and to get people thinking more globally about this stuff. Humor does not travel well, as you can tell from some of my jokes today. I still disagree about all this. I think humor is actually a really powerful topic. I don't think we should hide from it. Obviously, it needs to be appropriate, but I've learned tons of fantastic information about different parts of the world from people explaining jokes to me. Still doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be funny, but it gives me fantastic context to be able to get a better understanding of where I'm working. So the cross-cultural researchers say avoid humor. I think that's crap. And then finally, be yourself. I mean, we're talking about adapting. We adapt on a daily, hourly basis, depending on our audience. We want to be able to adapt in more calibrated ways when it comes to working across cultures. But at the same time, we don't want to turn into these just boring shells of a global human that, doesn't use humor or avoids everything of fear of upsetting people. You want to be yourself as well. So it's important not to get lost along the way. This is the document that I was talking about, which is Ask Great Questions. It's deliberately, it's probably small to read here, but if you are interested, send me an email at my email address, which is listed here. Or you could also ping me on that QR code. I'll leave again with from LinkedIn. It's my only social media that I really use. And that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps us up for today. The Culture Map is the book that I had referenced earlier. It's okay. It's actually a very, straight down the line type of cross-culture book. It goes through the data set that we just looked at today. I actually wrote my book as sort of a counterweight to this one because I felt like her examples were just a little bit too artificial. They were manufactured. I wanted to put some real gritty, real world stuff examples in where it's not always pretty. It's unclear as to who the good guy is. And sometimes things don't work out the way we had hoped. The Culture Code's another good one. It's really more on the advertising side of things, if that's of interest. Mine's the best one. Definitely, audiobook is fun. If you're here in Singapore, I have hard copies that I can sign as well. Reach out to me. Again, my contact detail is here. There's my LinkedIn code, and we can open it up to some Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. There have been a few questions that have come up. One of them is, how would you deal with people who have traits of both high context and low context cultures?
Yeah, the larger workshop that I do also looks at individual behavior types. You can look at behavioral models like DISC is one of my favorites. It's simple, it's old school, but I think it's really powerful. And what's interesting about a DISC is that it's then saying, okay, let's look at the individual rather than the culture that they're coming from. Now, you could have somebody who is a pretty direct person, but they might come from a part of the world that's incredibly indirect. And so they could kind of mix and match their styles accordingly. What I find is that you want to treat people the way they want to be treated. If you have the relationship with that individual, this is kind of a good conversation to have to try and figure out a way to do that in a safe way. We'd have to understand the context of that specific question. But what I would try to do would be to think about, like, are there ways to be able to try to decode what's going on there? Is there a certain tell? Are there certain situations where that person is indirect, or are there certain situations where they are direct? Oftentimes it comes to, it again, depends on where the person's from and their individual styles, but frequently people can be very direct in a number of situations, except when they're giving feedback, or if they are trying to avoid confrontation. That's the most common scenario, but I'd have to learn more detail about the individual. I don't know if that helps as a starting point, but that's how I would start thinking about it.
Great, thanks. I have another question from somebody. They've said, I often head to our US headquarters for work, and their style is quite different to the way that I work. Do you have any tips for, sorry, I'm just trying to, for me when I go to these events?
Yeah, so we'd
I
have
think
to
I
first of
heard that
all,
a lot actually. Everybody, like even I will go to the
yeah,
US, and sometimes it can be quite overwhelming because it can be quite loud. So
yes,
I'll let you answer that one.
yeah. And again, it comes back from where your starting point is. So if you score as somebody who is more indirect, who might be more speaking up only if being asked a question, that's the opposite of probably what you're experiencing in the US, where it does come across as a little bit more boisterous, or people sometimes talking over one another. You know, the advice is you've got to read the room, and the advice is to try to make your presence a little bit more known. Um, Again, without stepping too far outside of your comfort zone and being inauthentic. And that's the real trick here, which is how do you adjust without going too far and being fake? Because that's not the point. That's not going to help at all. But to understand, hey, this is the norm. People are not only are they a little bit louder, as you had said, and speaking up more. One bit of advice then is say, all right, I'm going to try to add more comments to this next meeting, where I wouldn't have done that in Singapore, because that's not how it would be. That's not the norm there. What is one or two comments that I can try to add within this meeting? The extreme is, and I've heard this in the United States, is people just seem to echo what the last person said, right? It's almost like a joke. It's just like they're speaking literally to be heard, even though they're not saying anything new. Let's try to avoid that, but let's try to take small incremental steps to fall into the environment that you're in. So what's one or two comments that could be added to a conversation that you wouldn't otherwise do back in your home country? That's probably a good starting point.
Great. Another one, someone else has said, sorry if this is a question or not. Do you have data to show the most diplomatic, non-transparent people to work with? Who are they?
Non-transparent is a difficult one.
Mm,
I have, when I first got here, I was doing a lot of stuff in China. This is back in 2006, 2007. And the advice I was getting is that, they're not transparent, or they change stuff all the time. And the underlying message was that they can't be trusted. And that's the one part where you have to be very careful with, because everything that I was showing you today was what's called data-driven generalizations. Stereotypes is what we have to be really careful about, which is putting groups of people into a bucket and kind of using that as an excuse to look down on them. And frequently what happens is it goes back to that misunderstanding, which is like, contracts in different parts of the world are viewed differently. Some are viewed more fluidly than what, say, I might be used to, or what might be what, in Australia you might be used to. Does that mean that, does that mean they're lying? Well, from their perspective, not necessarily. Um, I've had I've been screwed over probably more by Americans than anyone in China in my 20 years here. So again, like it's not like you have to be very careful, is my point, with the wording when it comes into this stuff. So I don't think there's data that would focus on specifically, like, what was the word that was used? Was it lack of transparency?
show, I guess, the most diplomatic and at the same and on a different scale, the non-transparent people.
Non-transparent was yeah. So I
Mm.
guess not that I've seen, although there's certainly research that would look at how contracts get handled in different countries. I think Hofstede is a good starting point with that, and probably I'd have to reread his stuff, but the guy who did the negotiation slides that I showed you um, is also somebody to look into, because what they would say, again, they're using their language very carefully, but they would say that, contracts are viewed as more fluid documents, which is a polite way of saying that there might be a severe lack of transparency when it comes to
Sure.
how things are portrayed or how things can change after what some other side of the party thinks has been locked down. I'm
Great.
trying to be
Thank
diplomatic.
you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and speaking in front of a bunch of lawyers as well. Careful with your words. So another question from the audience. It says, given the wide differences between cultures and norms, would a neutral and respectful / professional tone of speaking and writing be a safe and sensible option?
Yes, in an ideal world, if like I'll do this stuff with teams, and what we're trying to do is say, let's find the overlap where we can, as a team, agree to what these styles are going to be when we work together. Now that's ideal,
Mm.
right? You've got everybody sitting down, kind of coming up with this almost, it's like a communications contract that we do. But that's not always what we get access to if we're working with new people from the outside or new clients. Thinking of cultural intelligence is all about thinking about that question. So, what is the language that we should be using based on the people that we are communicating with, based on what we know about them, based on where we know they're from? What is the way to get to that universal communication style that is going to work? In my experience, you're not going to get there, but you can try. And I think it's worth trying to do. There's a phrase that's called airport culture, which is sort of like that mishmash of just the whole world meeting in this one area. And it does seem to work. It's a little bit different than outside of airports, but that airport culture is almost what we're talking about from a communications standpoint. So in other words, I think that meet in the middle approach, yes, but it's going to vary. I can't, I'm trying to think of like a global standard. And honestly, I don't think the planet's there yet. There's probably regional standards which can be identified.
Mm.
Globally, it's going to be tricky.
Great, thank you. And we're just on the hour. I have one more question, which is actually from me. Based on the back of that last question, what are your tips in terms of building stronger relationships? If we're not able to travel, a lot of people have, budget cuts in terms of travel, and it doesn't always make sense too. So, obviously over Zoom and over Teams and things like that. What are your tips in regards to building relationships through that? Because it is harder to have that cup of coffee and, really bring in those softer components to it.
So if we use that data set as a starting point, you've got different people, different parts of the world that prioritize this in different ways. The argument is, in the United States, you don't need to spend huge amounts of time on small talk or relationship building. It's more about the relationship is formed from the work that gets done. So the first idea would be, think about your audience, and that might start aiming you in the direction of how to do that. In other parts of the world, it means these are very specific, but does it make sense to carve out more time on a conference call for soft talk or for small talk, or finding out about somebody's background, does it make sense to add one additional question at the beginning or end of a call or somewhere in the call to find out and learn more about this person's past? In some parts of the world, maybe not. In others, yes. What I find universally is just to be thoughtful. So if I come across an article that somebody might find interesting, that's a digital way of continuing a relationship. I know it sounds boring and kind of corporate, but like I thought of you when I read this article. I thought I'd share it with you. That to me is marketing, right? Like that's actually marketing yourself. It's just putting your name out there. It's slowly building relationships. And so those are the kind of two pieces of that answer, which is use the data to see if that can help you come up with a plan for how to build a relationship. But then two, just be out there thinking about when you see something, and if you have that in the back of your head, go, oh, that person might find this interesting. 2 minutes out of your day to cut and paste and send it off to somebody. Hey, this reminded me of you. I think that's a universal way to help build relationships slowly but surely.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Really great to have you here with us today. His details, as you know, they're all up here. If not, you can feel free to reach out to me or the person that invited you to the webinar. If you do have a chance, please do fill in the survey. Once this Zoom closes, it'd be great to get any feedback so we know how to best address any future topics. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.